2, 1, and hello everybody. It is the Dark Conservatarian, and welcome back to Strike Force. This time is going to be like a discussion stream, just a one-on-one discussion stream with somebody who've had on 2 other occasions at least. Don of Two Plebs talking to you. Say hi, Don.
Hi, everybody. I am indeed Don the Pleb of Two Plebs Talk News.
Yeah, and so what is the idea of this stream? As you can tell by the title alone, is that we're going to be talking about U.S. presidents, and what kind of brought up the idea of this conversation is that plenty enough times I'd be I'm not going to mention any names or anything like that, but I've been hearing mentions from other people within Don's fan base, and it's fine that they feel this way, but that they don't like Reagan. I'm just curious about the opinions of Don himself, more particular, when it comes to Reagan, and I thought, hey, why not just make this about U.S. presidents in general? The biggest thing is probably regarding gun rights. Now, actually, let me lay the floor just a little bit here. I personally, Reagan is probably the one president that I know the most about. I read a biography on him, but I need to reread that at some time. And he is that
feeling.
What?
I know that feeling, the need to go reread it.
Yeah. And so as it stands currently, he's probably the one president that I like the most, mostly because he's the one that I know most about, but potentially I could grow to Calvin Coolidge a whole lot better if made the case about him. But for right now, we're just going to be sticking to Reagan, and I'm going to say that when it comes to Reagan, it's quite a messy tenure of a presidency that he had, I will say, because for example, you have something like immigration, of where that he signed the amnesty bill, but at the same time that was supposed to be a trade-off for him to get a funding for a border fence from the Democrat-controlled House at the time. But
so it's worth pausing there as to why not to like Reagan, right? Because look, the man seemed to know everywhere else that if you're going to do these kind of quid pro quo, as it were, but the legal kind deals in politics, then what you do is get at least something up front, right? And when he did this with economic policy, he would Reagan made the biggest tax increase in history. Yeah, but not really, right? And when he did that, he also got other things immediately, right? So he knew perfectly good and well that what you do is, if you're going to agree to this sort of thing, all right, fine, I'll sign the amnesty, but the same bill is going to say you're funding border security. And he didn't do that. That he already knew and then did that anyway, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, it does strike as a bit of a blight on his own record, but I would say at the same time that it's not necessarily of his own doing, much less did he want it. It was bad for him to be so willing about it, and taxes, that is another rather messy issue, because people be saying, particularly on the right, who are more liking of the guy, would say he decreased taxes, and they're looking more at income taxes, but they just say taxes, not income taxes specifically. And then the left will go in response, no, Reagan increased taxes, and what they mean by taxes, what the left means by taxes, all the other taxes that aren't income taxes, I can't remember what exact taxes they were.
You're talking capital gains and the corporate tax rate, but the whole claim there is dishonest to begin with, right? Because what the left is saying is that he did the largest percentile tax increase in American history, which is only true if you state it precisely like that, right? So when you lower the taxes to, if the taxes are 20%, you lower them to 1%, and then you increase them to 2%, that's a 100% tax increase, right? And yet it's still, 10% of where it started, right? And that's basically what happened. I forget what the exact numbers were, but that is what happened.
Mm-hmm. And just to reiterate what you told me on Discord DMs, you think that he was all right when it comes to economics, shit on guns, and was a decent communicator?
Yeah, basically his non-economic policy was really just not that good, right? His economic policy was fucking great. Look, hey, get out of people's way. Let the economy do whatever the hell it's going to do. It knows better how to do it than I do. And he was totally right. And there's no two ways about that. It's, the things that happened during his administration prove it over and over and over again. He was destroyed in the press numerous times because there was the giant downturn in 83 or some shit like that in the stock market, and he didn't do anything. And 5 minutes later, the economy just went bounding back up because it turns out if you let people start businesses, they do. Who knew? I mean, except basically every economist in all of human history. But, that he didn't come in and do the massive bailout with GM or something like that, whatever his equivalent was. And I don't remember off the top of my head. But that he didn't do that meant that he didn't care. And he was just going to let the economy fail, except that it didn't fail. Right?
Wait. Was there like a General Motors crisis back around that time? Or are you trying to make a reference to the Bush era?
So Bush and Obama basically were on the same page here, right? The major corporation bailout is a good idea. Reagan's answer to this was like, it was the Rocky meme, right? If he dies, he dies, right? And turns out that when you say, well, you're kind of on your own, people correct themselves. And yes, some things go away, right? And that's just life. Right? Like what, Sears needs to exist forever because it existed when I was a kid. I see the left go on about this in modern day all the time. Oh my God, Trump said he was going to bring jobs back to our shores. And I mean, I understand the unemployment rate is like some of the lowest ever recorded. So there's that, but Sears closed. And so he didn't do it. Like, well, did he say he was going to protect Sears or there were going to be jobs? What did he say? Because these two things are not analogous, right?
Yeah, but so there wasn't any General Motors crisis when it back in Reagan's term, where there was.
It wasn't GM. The stock market imploded back in the beginning of his first term somewhere.
Right, the first recession.
Yeah, and he said, "Look, it'll figure itself out," and he did nothing, right? And it figured itself out.
He did nothing except except for an income tax decrease, which, by the way, decreasing taxes would be more of a like, let's lax on some of our own actions. Like if you just you take less money, that's less of an action than taking more money, to put it very simply.
Well, all right, I guess to be fair, he didn't do nothing. He did decrease taxes because the point was, let's get the government out of people's way because they know how to live their own lives. So if we're taking less of their money, they'll spend it. And they did. So
yeah, there was a tax revenue increase. There was like more richer people to get higher on the tax rung, on the next tax rung when it comes to the ladder of tax brackets. Yeah. And so therefore, revenue increase. But I want to like ask you on something a little bit earlier. Was what you were saying basically was that he overall decreased regulations? Is that what you were trying to say earlier?
Well, I mean, he did, right? There was quite a few ways in which Reagan thought the idea was you get out of people's way. One of them was cutting regulations. To the best of my knowledge, Reagan is the only time ever that the Federal Register has decreased in size, ever, in all 250 years of the country. Just him. So, yeah, that's getting out of people's way.
Not even with Coolidge?
Only time ever that it decreased in size. Slowed growth, sure, but decreased in size, only time ever, to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I guess there wouldn't have been much of a federal or as big of a Federal Register for Coolidge to decrease in the first place. So
that's true. Reagan had a lot more to work with.
So I guess it's kind of a moot point on whether or not there was any decrease of that during Coolidge's term. On a side note, Reagan is a bitch. Fuck the Hughes Amendment. And I guess that's my question. So says Ghostly Gun in the chat. And so I guess on that note, like, was he actually wanting that bill to be passed? Like, was he actually in support of it? Or was it just that he was compromising too much to the Dems at the time?
Well, so that depends on how like ridiculously overly generous you want to be to fucking Reagan, right? There is no indication that he was compromising. He openly campaigned on the idea that people don't need automatic weapons in the run up to actually passing the Hughes Amendment. I mean, he was a leftist on guns. He just said like, look, they're machine guns and they're terrible and they're evil and so they're, we knew the NFA was a good idea, so what we need to do is make it so that no one can buy them anymore. And look, of any of the good policy decisions that he made for most of the 2A portion of the world all got nullified simply by going down this road, right? Because look, there's even the Supreme Court cases on the NFA said, well, it's only constitutional because it's a tax, right? And the government can tax things. That's fine. And so the Hughes Amendment, by its very nature, nullified the constitutionality of the NFA, right? Because it's not a tax anymore. Now it's a ban, right?
You know what they should have done was set a sunset clause on that, the same way that there was a sunset clause set on the 1993 or 94, whatever it was, assault weapons ban.
Well, so when you have the right wing arguing for banning weapons, who's going to do that, right? I mean, the left is not going to come out and be like, yeah, we've been trying to ban these fucking automatic weapons since 1934. Let's put a sunset provision on it. No, it's not going to happen, right?
Okay, so is 94, as Ghostly Gun says,
yes.
Thanks. But, okay. So basically back then there was no side when it came to Washington that was arguing for gun rights outright.
Basically. I mean, even the evil NRA was like, yeah, Hughes Amendment's fine. That's cool.
Yeah, that's something that I hear about the NRA is that they kind of did a disservice to the Second Amendment back in their early days, the late 80s, 90s, They even helped architect the 94 assault weapons ban, didn't they?
Yeah, co-wrote large portions of it. So, I mean, this idea that the NRA is just eminently pro-gun. I mean, look, I think bump stocks are stupid, but things being stupid doesn't mean you ban them. Otherwise, we ban the left, right? I
mean, okay, yeah. And that is kind of like a stark comparison. Between Reagan and like Bush Jr. more specifically, because at least Bush Jr. he like let the assault weapons ban expire. Yeah, did not put it to a vote to have it renewed.
So, well, Bush, the president, doesn't have any control over whether or not the Senate votes on something, right? And the problem that they had renewing the assault weapons ban was when it got to the Senate, people like Ted Cruz were sitting there going, look, it didn't work. We commissioned 3 studies on this, and they all said the same thing. It didn't work. It didn't do anything. The guy who wrote the final study said is eminently anti-gun. To this day, he's still kind of campaigning around talking about how, well, even if it didn't work, maybe we should keep doing it because maybe one day it'll work, right? And so there simply weren't any votes in the Senate to get it done. So Bush can say whatever the hell he wants, except that at the time what he said was, yes, I think this assault weapons ban is a good idea, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of like, oh, the right wing will protect your gun rights that goes on in this country, and that doesn't really bear out, right?
Yeah, not fully, especially in the early days. Would you argue that Ted Cruz was at least, or is at least, more pro-gun rights than freaking Reagan?
Yeah, probably. I'm not intimately familiar with Cruz's stance on everything to do with guns, but he doesn't seem to be a big fan of, for example, the assault weapons ban. To be fair, that wasn't in front of Reagan, so I don't know what his stance on it would have been. Equally speaking, Cruz has said a few things over time that make me think he's not a big fan of the Hughes Amendment, and that was in front of Reagan, and that alone makes me think that he's more pro-gun than Reagan.
This kind of goes making me think, like back on Reagan, when he was like governor of California, he put like a full out, I don't know if it was like a full-on ban on guns, but pretty much a ban on guns in California.
Yeah, he
And
wasn't a friend of guns when he was governor of California either. So
yeah, I don't know. It almost seems like he was worse back then than when he was president. He's still like trying to shake off some of those, um,
lefty roots.
yeah,
Well, I
some of
mean,
those lefty roots.
if you go back and watch Reagan before he was governor, he went and talked to Congress, and he's a crazy leftist in his earlier years. And look, I mean, that's not really surprising if you live in Southern California and you're a movie star and you don't have any particular interest in politics except insofar as the culture is talking about them. You're a leftist. You know, it's just that's what it is. And so this is how he came up with such famous phrases as the problem with our friends on the left isn't what they don't know, but that they know so many things that aren't so, right? Because that's true.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, we're kind of all over the place, a little bit all over the place on this conversation, everybody. But when it comes to immigration, how would you like sum up his position when it came to immigration, other than the whole amnesty thing that we mentioned that he did in '86?
I think he really didn't care that much. Um, and,
About as
and
apathetic as you, could we say?
yeah, right. I mean, the reality here seems to be because when Reagan cared about a thing, he was laying it down hard everywhere, right? You know,
Right. And the big thing
and
that he was very passionate about and laid down hard was tax decreases and just economic growth in general,
yeah, and
and a right leaning approach to it.
yeah, and getting rid of the Soviet Union, right? I mean,
Right.
and look,
That's another thing I got to ask is his foreign policy position, but go on.
I mean, when he cared about a thing, he was a force of nature in politics, right? And I think the end result is he took a look at immigration and said, "I don't really give a damn. We probably should secure the borders. That's probably a good idea. So fine, we'll do this amnesty thing, but hey, come back and secure the borders later." And because he didn't care, he didn't follow up. Because he didn't follow up, it didn't happen, right? And look, right, wrong, or otherwise, I don't think crucifying the man because he didn't give a damn is particularly great. Also, can we all be honest and say that immigration in the 80s was not what immigration is now? Primarily
Yeah.
because of regrowth of the welfare state post Reagan. You know?
Yeah. I mean, now Obama has taken out the work requirement for applying for food stamps.
Know what I mean? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so dramatic. And I know. But Don, illegal immigrants can't get welfare, except that they do because there are so many things that we
Falsified social security numbers.
well, not even that, right? So they can't go get SNAP, for example, right? You can't go to a welfare office, say, "I'm an illegal immigrant, give me SNAP," and have the welfare office go, "Okay." Well, I mean, you can, but that's like a chargeable offense for whoever does it, right? However, they're required to go to school, right? And this isn't just okay, there's one more kid in class. This is where all the English as a second language classes come from, which is an added expense because that's a service, as it were, that the government provides, right? So, look, I mean, the simple reality is as long as the government is providing every single thing in the world, and they are, all of this immigration costs money and a lot of money.
Right. I actually have some sources that are provided by Metal Minister. You know who Metal Minister is, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
great guy. Honestly, unironically, great guy.
Guy needs to get in here and come watching this. I'm sure he would like it. But yeah, the guy has like provided me some sources when it comes to the cost of welfare regarding illegal immigration and illegal immigrants getting welfare. I actually have to check out those sources sometime. Maybe even do an editorial on it. And I guess I'll
It's
just
very complicated.
yeah, just like Reagan's tenure, and you know, I guess that's like one thing when it comes to Reagan. Just overall, there are a lot of things that I have a hard time reconciling when it comes to Reagan. And when the more and more I know about the guy, the more and more nuanced I come to know about his tenure in office and so forth. And
Yeah.
I guess in a way, the more and more kind of disapproving I get of the guy. Like when it comes to like gun rights, that's the biggest thing that is hard to reconcile for somebody who like formerly liked Reagan and I guess to a small extent still kind of does.
Well, and make no mistake, that's the hardest pill to swallow with the guy, right? Because a lot, I mean, I can make some excuses for him on the immigration front, right? Because he was out there killing the welfare state as best he could at the time. He was removing regulation. He was the closer that we get to being a fairly free people, the less immigration law matters at all, right? However, the long-term effects of that have been not particularly great.
By the way, Carlton Banks in the chat, how many trench coats does Conservatarian own? Just one, and this ain't exactly a trench coat. It's a pea coat, although I do wish that I had a full-on trench coat. Black trench coat, by the way. He has 12 trench coats. What? You just read Red Feather's chat? And by the way, I stole it from a lesbian, as one of Bering's fans said.
That's totally reasonable.
Yeah, that is such an inside joke that is like pretty much cemented when it comes to references made to me. Like I had that little bit of drama with Bering when he did a response video to me. We're on good terms now, but still, one of his fans made one of the funniest comments ever, saying that that I looks like I stole my peacoat from a lesbian. Okay, so back on subject though. I'm sure that you would have like a lot to speak when it comes to foreign policy, considering that you are now like a minarchist and you are a veteran, a Marine veteran.
Yeah.
So, what is your opinion regarding like Reagan's foreign policy? And I guess this would kind of connect to Iran-Contra. I mean, the subject of Iran-Contra would kind of.
Can you even mention Reagan in foreign policy without talking Iran-Contra? I mean, Jesus.
Yeah. So, what would your opinion of him on foreign policy be?
I mean, that his entire foreign policy record is overshadowed by Iran-Contra. I mean, no one mentions anything else. It's pretty much that simple. It's worth noting that whether you like it or not, he was still effectively 100% responsible for the destruction of the Soviet Union, which, look, if you think communism is on a different continent is going to destroy the world, then, I mean, look, that's a good thing. I am not quite isolationist. I don't look, if the Soviets want to starve their own people, let them. Have at it. I don't care. Lucky for him, Vietnam wasn't a thing by the time that he got there, because I think that could have been disastrous. But and his war on drugs stance is, I mean,
that's another thing.
It was the popular thing to do, and it sort of plays into his foreign policy simply because of South America. So
the war on drugs was like first started by Nixon, wasn't it?
I think so. I mean,
yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but Reagan did not exactly do anything to help out with it, and the war on drugs is still existing to this day.
Yeah. Well, and look, it's a thing that I think exists because we adopted the idea of pre-crime being a thing, right? And it's been that way since the 20s. So I don't. Maybe sometime in our lifetimes we'll decide that pre-crime's not a thing. But considering we're all running around talking about pushing red flag laws right now, I don't think that's going to happen, right? So I don't know how much that is on him. Yes, chat, Nancy Reagan pushed big on the drug wars, the ridiculous things that came out of that, just say no to drugs. Yeah, that was going to work. Come on, man.
People are too curious and, just a bunch of troublemakers, too much of troublemakers to say no.
Well, I mean, it's either that or, look, people take drugs for a reason, right? You don't have to like that or think that it's
medicinal weed.
Fuck medicinal weed. I am so... This eminent edge case that is supposed to persuade all of us is crap, right? People get take a look at California when they legalized weed. Apparently, there were 8 million undiagnosed cancers, glaucomas, any other number of ridiculous things where no actual diagnosis was ever provided. People just went to doc-in-a-boxes that handed out pot prescriptions and said they had it, and then ta-da, right? People get high because they want to.
Okay. So you're saying that medicinal weed is not a special case, is not a special exception when it comes to weed?
So,
or it doesn't make sense to you why people would make it a special exception?
The output of medical marijuana is that people who want to get high, and that doctors prescribe pot because people want to get high. And they want to make money, let's be honest here. Prescription drugs are more dangerous, in my opinion. I mean, hey, look, some of them are, right? But
Slaverson says all weed is medicinal because life is a pain in my ass sometimes. That makes sense. I mean, if you are somebody that has anxiety issues or stress and not even necessarily diagnosed by a doctor for anxiety and stress, then medicinal weed could probably help you out with that, just to chill your nerves or whatever.
So as a prime example of what I'm talking about, who in their life doesn't at some point have anxiety? One person?
Well, yeah. I mean, somebody who is more consistent with it. But
therein is the shtick, right? Exactly, right? We're not at any point where, specifically if you have this kind of cancer, it treats it. No, that's not how medicinal pot works. It works like go in there and be willing to say you have a problem that's not confirmable, and they'll give you a license to smoke pot. I mean, that's how it works. And so, look, if you want to legalize weed, legalize weed. I'm not opposed to this. I don't care. But this idea that it's a medicinal exception. No, it isn't. It's just legalizing pot the long way around, where you have to go pay somebody $50 for a license.
Yeah. And we kind of veered away from foreign policy just a little bit. But there's one final thing that we did not quite touch on in that short little conversation is the Mujahideen and how Reagan helped them out. Do you think that was a good choice for him at the time anyways? I mean, fast forward to present day and they turn out to, they become the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and whatnot, and we end up with 9/11. But for the time, do you think that's a good decision or not?
So basically, as far as I can tell, Reagan did nothing wrong here, right? He said, hey, nobody wins wars in Afghanistan anyway, and the Soviets are going to go light money on fire to try and take it. Yeah, fine, let's give them a little bit of cash and guns, and they'll kill Soviets. And look, I'm an easy sell on killing commies, fine. On the other hand, though, look, this exact thing is where we get, but the whole reason 9/11 happened was backlash. The CIA wrote a report on it. What was the backlash for? Does anybody know? Anybody?
That is kind of a thing that I have when it comes to foreign policy. My opinion kind of is, if there's a crisis in the present, we solve it in the present. And whatever happens in the future from anything related to that current crisis, we'll handle it as it comes. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it,
Well, that's a little, I mean, that's sort of asking to get problems, right? This whole one day at a time foreign policy has caused us more problems than basically anything else we've ever done in foreign policy. However, I ask the question almost rhetorically, but look, in case anybody ever fucking knows, and nobody ever does, the backlash was because we didn't run a Marshall Plan in Afghanistan after they fought the Soviets, supposedly. We owed it to them. Just ask them. They'll tell you. And so if we would have just done that, if we would have just funded Afghanistan for the next, half century, maybe more, then 9/11 wouldn't have happened, because the correct answer on the left for everything is just pay people money and then everything's good, right? And by the way, this is another one of those things where the Mujahideen were always going to become the Taliban, right? They just were. And okay, if you know that, then I think that should probably weigh a little bit on your consideration. But I'm in no way certain that they did, right? I mean, and maybe that's just my being generous here, but I'm not certain they knew what was going to come out of it, right? If only because the Middle East had been a friggin' war zone since always, right?
Yeah.
But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they knew. Maybe there's a bunch of documents somewhere where they're like, yeah, look, we're going to help these guys kill the Soviets, but after that, they're going to be a real fucking problem.
And you go mentioning all these things when it comes to like relating to cost. I guess that kind of segues us to like the next subject that is hotly debated about Reagan is regarding spending. Like a good portion of the military spending, we can all like come to the consensus that yeah, it was of his own action and support. But when it comes to like welfare spending, my current opinion on welfare spending back then, anyways, that was more of the Democrats' action and support and whatever. And Reagan was just being too compromising in that area as well.
Well, so in this, how much do you care what he said versus what he did seems to really be the question, right? Because Reagan was pretty actively trying to get rid of the welfare state. On the other hand, he was also giving them more money to fund it, right? So,
ironically,
yes, was it him compromising for the sake of getting things done? Almost certainly. Because a lot of those things happen, like, oh, well, you want to like double military spending this year, fine, but the welfare state is getting more money. And he went, okay, well, getting rid of communism is more important. And I don't know whether or not that's true. I mean, is the long-term sacrifice worth that short-term gain? Was the Soviet Union suddenly going to rise up and take over America? Well, based on what happened after they fell, we know that wasn't going to happen. But did Reagan know that? No. I mean, nobody knew how bad it was in the Soviet Union at the time. And the press was actively lying about it when they went there.
Although people like to make predictions with like Red Dawn, for example.
Yeah. And this idea that the Soviets were going to come over here and set foot on American soil, that was never going to happen, right? They simply could not do it. And this idea of like, oh, well, we were, if we let them take over all of the Asian continent, then suddenly they would have been this huge superpower that we couldn't contend with. Turns out they were already starving and dying. They already were falling apart. They probably would have fallen apart on their own in about 10 more years. And there was nothing in the world that was going to stop it.
Yeah. And this kind of goes all the way back to the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution, because they could not like get enough economic growth, like get enough revenue to fund their own military power, it seems. Like when Lenin had first led his Bolshevik Revolution, like a few years later, there was another revolution, kind of like a counter-revolution, or so I've read anyways, and economic growth was slow at first. So to kind of spurt up economic growth, they had like the special, or the, damn it, I can't remember what it's called, but basically they put in like these free market zones to where they let some people, some select few people own private property. What?
Yeah.
The special economic plan?
No, special exemption zones, which it doesn't mean anything, right? They just, Lenin pulled a bunch of the capitalist pigs out of the gulags and said, hey, look, we can't put food on the table, and you guys used to, so do it. It was ridiculous. And by the way, this is why when you talk to commies, they're like, oh, it wasn't real communism because they had some free market stuff. Like, yeah, that's because right before that, they were doing that real communism thing, and everyone was dying.
Yeah, including the Soviet Union, until they had to do that desperate push.
Right.
Which that kind of undercuts the whole argument regarding communism being the superior economic model, because if it really is the superior economic model, then it shouldn't need some spurt of capitalism to help boost itself up, you know?
Well,
there they were.
I mean, look, according to, not to get too horribly balls deep into communism, but look, according to the communists, it's all just magically going to work out. People will work just as hard for nothing, and I don't think so. I mean, I don't know what else to say here. The incentive structure of communism is terrible. Economists at the time were saying this. I mean, everybody knew, and nobody wanted to say it, right? Because it sounds good, except it doesn't sound good. It sounds terrible.
So I guess that's like enough about Reagan. Regarding like a decrease in regulations, like if you had any sources on that or came across any, like if please share me some, like over Discord or something like that.
Him decreasing regulation?
Yeah, Reagan.
I think it's the Learn Liberty guys have like 2 or 3 20-minute videos on the subject, of which they provide all the sources underneath. And being as they already did it, I mean, I'm not going to again.
Oh, you're talking about the YouTube channel Learn Liberty.
Yeah, them.
Okay, I'll have to. I'll have to like check them out more. But I guess weaving away from Reagan though and talking more about George Bush. As far as I know, George Bush wasn't outspoken against the Hughes Amendment either. Do you think that you could confirm that or something?
Junior or senior?
Junior. I mean, senior is a conversation on his own because he kind of increased taxes back up just a little bit. But regarding Bush Jr.,
Bush Jr., he, to the best of my knowledge, Junior's take on the Hughes Amendment is probably something along the lines of, well, that's just the way it is, right? Now, as a guy who lived through it being passed, I don't see how that's his take, but as a politician, I understand that that's going to be life, right? Well, I mean, we've had it since 1987. It must be good. Okay.
Right.
We've had rape since the beginning of humanity. That doesn't make it good.
It thinks that it's a legal precedent or something, the same way that Kavanaugh said about Roe v. Wade.
So there's not legal precedent, thank God, as far as I know, on the Hughes Amendment. The big legal challenges for it are not going to happen because if Gun Owners of America has their way, I think they're working on it right now. Right, they're challenging the NFA, but they keep getting shot down, basically under a ruling that no longer applies. So that's nice.
By the way, I wasn't saying that I think that's legal precedent. I was saying that basically
I get where you're going at.
Seems almost what Bush thinks. And well, yeah, just to clarify to chat as well.
Well, I mean, look, it's.
Although nobody's saying it currently in the chat, just wanted to clear up any confusions, but sorry.
Head that off at the pass. I would look, Bush wasn't in any way pro-gun as far as I can tell. Like every other Republican that runs for office, he said, I mean, it's the same shit Trump says. We're going to protect the Second Amendment. It's very important. It's the most amazing amendment in the world, and it's tremendous and wonderful. And we're gonna secure your gun rights. You know what we should do is pass red flag laws.
And by the way, I'm open to the assault weapons ban. I'm willing to compromise on that. Also, bump stocks, they should go.
Right. And so it's the same game every time, right? And if you go back and listen to Bush, the Second Amendment's very important. It's a big part of our culture, and it's the thing that holds the country together, or whatever the fuck you said at the time, and then turns around and is like, well, I mean, yeah, but maybe we should renew the assault weapons ban, bro.
So, wait. So that kind of brings up the conversation again. So, was like Bush in support of the AWB whilst the Republican-controlled House and Senate disagreed with him on that?
Yeah, the Senate shut it down, mostly because of Ted Cruz, as far as I know.
Well, yeah, but Ted Cruz wasn't in the Senate at the time. Although I do hear that he was like a lawyer working with Bush.
Not in '94, in 2004. when Bush was president. He was in support of renewing the assault weapons ban. And the Senate at the time said, we're not doing that. And
but
Cruz was in the Senate at the time. There's some really good video of him arguing with Feinstein over that.
Are you sure that's not like the recent footage, like after he had become senator in 2012?
No, this is much older than that. I think he was in one of the committees at the time. He wasn't sitting in. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Okay.
I'd have to go dig it back up. I haven't looked in a while.
I do recall the clip that you're talking about where he's arguing with Feinstein regarding AR-15s and just gun rights in general. But I always kind of was under the assumption that was after he had become senator, not like back in circa 2004.
No, I think there's one of him in 2004. But
I mean, perhaps
maybe I'm wrong. It could be 2012.
Perhaps he was arguing like against the assault weapons ban, and got the Senate to be convinced that, hey, yeah, we should like just not vote to renew the assault weapons ban. Sorry, Bush, but we don't agree with you on this one. We're just going to let it expire.
Yeah. Well, so knowing factually that there is video of Bush Jr. saying we should renew the assault weapons ban, right? And he,
really?
Yeah. And the Senate is where it died, right? So, I mean,
okay.
Not pro-gun.
I will have to say to everybody, I retract what I have said before in the past about Bush Jr. being pro-gun because the assault weapons ban expired under his tenure. Apparently, it was in spite of him, not because of him. Just like in a lot of ways, a lot of the economic growth under Obama was more in spite of him than because of him. Just in my current opinion.
We could talk for hours about the economic growth under Obama.
Yeah, which that's a little bit for a later subject, as I have him written down here on WordPad. But regarding the Iraq War with the Bush, like I'm sure that you would have like some opinions about that. You have fought in the Iraq War, have you?
No, I fought in Afghanistan.
Okay, well, never mind that then. But opinion on Bush's foreign policy, like Iraq, Afghanistan. Mainly those two, and whatever else you can think of.
Do you have any other foreign policy that mattered? I mean, that anyone cares about?
Yeah, that's what economic growth under Obama. We'll get to that here in a second. Kunder Thunt.
That guy's name kills me every fucking time. Anyway, so as far as the Iraq war goes, there definitely were WMDs in Iraq. Don't have to like that, but it's true. That does not mean there were nukes. However, there is satellite footage of nukes leaving Iraq because we told them that we were coming long before we came. So think of that whatever you want. I don't really care. I mean, this is the big thing. There were no WMDs, except that there were shitloads of chemical burns, and we know he gassed his own people like 10 years before.
There was a uranium enrichment facility found within recent years, wasn't there?
Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's the thing. And I also gone hearing like there was this one episode of the Mark Levin show, and he was like. I think it was Rick Santorum that he was interviewing, or it might have been someone else that he was on call with. But basically, Rick Santorum was fighting against Bush and Karl Rove and the rest of the heads of the Republican establishment, that they ultimately did find WMDs in Iraq. But basically, they just wanted to let the issue be because they thought that it was not a winning subject. When really, that's the whole purpose why you originally gone in there. Like, whether a person agrees with it or not, you would be, like, helping your own self and your own cause and, like, restore some of your own credibility or whatever the proper word is. Yeah, credibility regarding the WMDs in Iraq. If you have revealed that there were WMDs in Iraq, Bush, Rove, y'all. But no, they were just all like, no, it's a non-winning subject. Well, no, here's the thing to restore yourself, but go on.
Look, to some degree, and I hate to even say this, but it's worth noting that Jon Stewart existed under Bush. And I know the entire left would be like, oh, but it was just a joke, bro. It was just a joke. Except that man was determining a lot of the narrative in the country at the time, right? And so when he played every single night for like fucking months, Bush saying some of the idiotic shit that he said in relation to the Iraq war, like, well, you guys like my dad, and this is the same guy he was fighting. I mean, that was not helping. All right. And so it kind of didn't matter whether or not we found WMDs, was at least their opinion. And if you go back and listen to some of the people talk about it now, they're like, look, the country didn't want the war anymore. So, and there is a fact that in democracies, if the populace thinks a war is unwinnable, it's unwinnable because the populace is the one that has to be carrying support of it. Now, to the whole subject, if he was going to get nukes and we were worried about that, right, then, okay, fine. Maybe that we give a damn enough to go over there and take the nukes. And, you know, have him hung by the populace 48 hours after he's found or something because they hate him. On the other hand, the whole premise of what came after that is what bugs the shit out of me. This idea that we're going to pay people to be our friends, because that's what coin operations is, right? And you don't have to like that. And I know it's a uncharitable assessment, as I'm often told, but that's the reality, right? Oh, we're going to build schools. What are you saying? We're going to pay. We're going to give you money and you're going to like us. And it turns out that doesn't work unless people already like you.
I will say that definitely, despite whether or not we should have gone to Iraq in the first place, that it was definitely handled wrong regarding what happened in 2006 was what was said on the Mark Levin show. And them just leaving alone the WMDs as soon as they had found them. That was definitely some mishandling right there. But do you think that we should not have gone to Iraq in the first place?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not sure I have a strong opinion on this one way or the other. This is sort of like the Korea and nuke things. Like Kim Jong-un has nukes. Like, yeah, but Trump is right. His button is bigger and it works. I mean, I know. How dare you say such a thing to a foreign leader? What? Come on. But I mean, okay, if we're going to assume that Saddam having nukes means we should go over there and stomp a mud hole in his ass, then what we should do is go over there and stomp a mud hole in his ass. None of this. Let's rebuild the country and make everything great and wonderful and give them Western democracy. Turns out they don't really want it, right? I mean, that's the way it is.
Do you think that Afghanistan was a bad decision?
No. This is the thing that fucking kills me. Don, you got to understand that all the hijackers came from Saudi Arabia. So the people we really should have been killing was Saudi Arabia. Yeah, that's it. It's almost like, and I know this is wild, that the caliphate that they were building didn't really care about national borders.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of runs in parallel with ISIS as well, because ISIS has been known to influence people from in the States to like attack. So it could be in the same way of Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda had influences of people within Saudi Arabia. Doesn't mean that it was directed by Saudi Arabia or anything like that.
Yeah.
Although there could be a certain argument that maybe Saudi Arabia was funding some terrorist organizations, including Al-Qaeda.
They definitely are. I mean, it is so horrendously unlikely that Saudi isn't funding terrorism that, I mean, we're beyond the edge of reason to say that they definitely are, right? Now, I guess the question at that point is which terrorism? And I mean, is that a question that there's a good answer to? You know? But look, the people who were interested in attacking America directly, that were going to do it anyway, no matter what, was the Taliban. And where were they at? Afghanistan. That's where you go fight them, you know? And yes, there is a whole shitload to talk about in the world of Pakistan, as Chet keeps bringing up. Because, look, Pakistan is not our friend. And this premise that they are is way wrong, right? And that should have been known before we were like, oh, well, we shouldn't piss off Pakistan. I mean, then it'll be a 3-front war. No, motherfucker, it's the same front. It just, the Taliban does not care about the border to Pakistan. They just walk over there and then go, if you shoot at us, then the Pakistanis will kill you. And for some reason, we pretended like we cared.
Yeah, as far as I know, we don't have any reason to like Pakistan. I know that we have outright reason to dislike Iran, but whether or not we should go to war with them, I don't. I'm convinced right now that we shouldn't really.
Well, the big question is, how much do we care? Again, we're at the line of nukes are apparently the third rail of fucking caring, right? Like, you have to care if somebody else has nukes. And okay, I mean, nukes are a big deal. Don't get me wrong. You know, the ability to level a whole goddamn city is relevant, right? And so again, if we are convinced for whatever reason, and there are plenty of good ones, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to pejoratively say whatever reason, but you know, if we are convinced that if Iran gets nukes, then U.S. cities are going to get nuked, then fine, stop them getting nukes. But again, if what you're going to do is say, we're going to go over there and stop a big giant mud hole in the ass of Iran, then do that. Don't go run around afterwards and go, well, but what we should really do is build them schools.
Okay, so I haven't been really paying that close attention to the chat, so sorry, True Gray, for not approving your comments, but basically he says MAGA fags, and Ted Cruz has a long history of saying fuck you to Bush. Well, more power to him. But yeah, so I don't know. I think those are like the big things regarding Bush. I mean, of course, there's all the economic policies, but I feel like
he was so bad on economics. I mean, he gets. Don't get me wrong, he was better than Obama. All right,
Bush Jr. better than Obama.
Yes, but in some ways, not much. Right. Like the Bush stimulus was possibly one of the single most retarded things done in economic policy in American history. And I know that. I say that in light of FDR existing. So, but I mean, the outcomes were better, which is to say it didn't do anything and nobody cared. But I mean, Bush, I will save capitalism. Yeah, exactly. Right. Capitalism didn't need saving. Leave it alone.
Yeah, Jay Brewski, as he said in the chat, I guess that was what you were addressing.
Yeah.
So regarding like tax cuts, though, like what is the big difference between Bush Jr.'s tax cuts and Reagan's tax cuts?
Not a lot.
That kind of confused me.
So not a lot. I mean, Reagan was going much more across the board than Bush was. Bush thought, like most Keynesians, that you can do these targeted analysis things, and then somehow or another that's going to work out, even though not once in all of human history has it worked out. So, okay. But look, I mean, tax cuts are tax cuts, and they're inherently a good thing. So, I mean, good on you for tax cuts.
Yeah, except if you have some jealousy complex of the rich, you know. Except if you have some jealousy complex of the rich.
Yeah, right. I'm sure that's coming later. But, you know, look, tax cuts are a good thing. At the same time, though, Bush was a big government guy. There's no way that you can say that the guy who signed in the No Child Left Behind Act, who effectively, I understand that the Federal Department of Education existed before him, but he effectively made it a thing, right? It didn't do a whole hell of a lot before Bush, and now it does boatloads. And equally speaking, you know, the Patriot Act, everybody's favorite Bush, what the hell, right? Because that is the death of the Fourth Amendment. And if you talk to guys who were, well, to be fair, it's not like I've talked to them. I've just listened to interviews from them. But if you listen to interviews from guys who were in the NSA at the time, Bush apparently said things like, we will never again miss 9/11 happening, record everything, don't miss anything. I mean, it was quite literally establishment of Big Brother in a way that hadn't existed in human history before that. To be fair, mostly because of technology, but you know, the things that the Patriot Act permitted them to do were pretty ridiculous.
Oh yeah, NSA spying. That's the biggest, most well. It's the most notable thing and most remembered thing when it comes to Bush's presidency. When it comes to like big government intrusions, and
Yeah.
Kunder Thunt says, "Don't forget Medicare Part D."
It's completely worthwhile. Also, a piece of crap. It's to have Medicare Part D, you have to agree that Medicare is a good idea, and I understand it polls really well, and so politically touching it is a disaster. At the same time, you're giving credence to Medicare existing. Stop doing that. It's bad. Yeah. So
That's another big thing big issue that's kind of confusing to me. But something that I am more passionately against is Obamacare, which I guess we'll kind of segue into talking about
oh,
Obama.
oh,
Like
the Affordable Care Act. Ooh, buddy.
I guess one thing that I'll open up though is I'm pretty sure that you did not see the one live stream that I had with Chatsberg.
Just a highlight reel.
Just okay, but yeah, but that one was purely about well, almost purely about guns. There was some economic conversation that was made, and basically Chatsberg made the comment that that Obama was supposedly the most fiscally conservative one because he under his watch the deficit decreased the most. And I wish I said this at the time, but this is something that I'm saying right now, that whatever spending decreases happened was more in spite of him than because of him, except for maybe military spending, but that like is small pennies in comparison to when it comes to welfare, as we know.
So,
Well, maybe small pennies is being a bit hyperbolic, but go on.
deficit decrease. Okay, that's simply not true. That's a spreadsheet game, right? You just stop counting a bunch of shit, and therefore it's not spending. Okay. Uh, so, I mean, the deficit can't decrease, and the output of that be that the debt increases. Those two things are in conflict. So, I mean, it cannot be. It is factually impossible.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that he did like one of the biggest economic stimuluses, like or stimuli, if that's the proper term, right there. Um, that was what, 0.7 trillion or something like that, and well, actually, that's the biggest thing that I know when it comes to Obama's spending. Um, and yeah, it was him with the Democratic-controlled House. Sorry, I'm trying to look at something here at the same time. Um, that was the big thing, and it was like with the Democrats in control of both the House and Senate that he was able to get that passed. And as soon as like the Republicans got into the House of Representatives, it seemed that there was more of a check. Like it wasn't one party control of Congress and presidency all of a sudden.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's the whole point. But presumably, Obama had a mandate to do Obama things because he had a House and a Senate, and he was the president. Therefore, supposedly, that means that what he should have done is pass the Affordable Care Act however he wanted, because I mean, it was one of his signature platforms, right? But hey, if that's what he wants to do, I guess. And by the way, if you go back and you look at the people who wrote the Affordable Care Act and were real big proponents of it at the time, they're saying exactly what you'd think they'd be saying in a very cynical right-wing way. Oh yeah, we knew this was going to lead to Medicare for all. We knew that this was going to teach people that the government should be in charge of healthcare, and we knew that we couldn't get it past the populace at the time, so we did this so that in a handful of years we could pass Medicare for all. And that's straight from the guy who wrote the bill.
Yeah, that's another thing is regarding conversations of Obamacare. People saying it's not single payer, but no, it's supposed to be like a step forward towards a single payer. I mean, Bernie Frank, is that his name, or no, Barney Frank, that's his name. Barney Frank said it himself that Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, was supposed to be the stepping stone to getting towards single payer.
Yeah.
And if Obama had like a single party control of the both the House and Senate all of his time, who knows? He probably would have gone more extreme than what his rhetoric was at the time of 2009 through 2011 regarding healthcare.
Well, I mean, this is one of those things. Go back and watch Obama when he was campaigning, right? What he is talking about is turning America into a socialist country. And he outright says it. Well, not outright, right? So he more than once, we're going to fundamentally change America. To what? Right? And look, that's, oh, this has always been the American way. Then why did Obama need to fundamentally change America?
You need to make it sound like you got a little bit more phlegm in your throat. We're going to fundamentally change America.
America.
Yeah, and add a shit ton of stutters. But okay, this was the main source that I had got kind of confirming just a little bit my opinion regarding Obama. The spending slowdown was caused by gridlock, not by Obama moderating his demands. Point conservatives. This is just an article reviewing all the claims regarding Obama's spending. It is important to recognize that Obama did not stop trying to expand government after 2010. The president's 8 annual budget requests gradually upped their 10-year revenue demands from $1.3 trillion to $3.4 trillion, while proposing an average of $1 trillion in new program spending over the next decade. His play, in short, was to gradually trim the budget deficit by chasing large spending increases with even larger tax increases. The Republican Congress stopped him. My assessment, Obama's most important fiscal legacy was a sin of omission. Okay, I think that's the end conclusion. But yeah, basically that point right there. It's in spite of Obama that whatever economic growth happened, whatever decrease of the deficit happened, that was in spite of him, not because of him.
Well, so
I mean, he was against fracking, for crying out loud. Let's not forget that.
Yeah,
what about cap and trade and regulations, increased regulations on the coal industry and banning of offshore oil drilling?
Again, according to all the lefties in the world, this somehow means economic growth, right? So you got to understand that when you're arguing with people who are moronically on the left, that's not a thing, right? Saying, well, he's against fracking. Yeah, because fracking's bad, and that means we're going to spend more money on renewable energy, and that's going to power the whole economy, which is why Solyndra worked. I mean, what?
Yeah, if he got his way completely in subsidizing green energy, that would have been another increase in spending.
However, here's the kinds of problems that you have when talking about this sort of thing, right? So, there was all this economic growth under Obama. He had one of the biggest GDP upticks in American history. Yeah, I guess that's kind of true, but only kind of, right? Because GDP calculates money spent by the government as a positive, right? And so if Obama goes out and spends a shitload of money, then the GDP goes up. And by the way, that is exactly where all of that GDP growth came from. Now, it seems counterintuitive at best to say that he reduced spending, but he exploded GDP by doing a lot of government spending. And that's because it's obviously fucking impossible to be both, right? However, the simple fact of the matter is his GDP explosion during the, 2 quarters that he had such a thing was a straight line up and a straight line down. Because when the government spends all this money, that's it. It just dies, right? But if you count the government spending money, then yeah, GDP went up for a couple minutes, right?
How about the corruption in the Obama administration? Yeah, says Drew Grave. Yeah, like Fast and Furious, for example. Kind of a big irony right there. In 2013, he wanted to renew the assault weapons ban, but at the same time, along with Eric Holder, ended up supplying those kind of arms to, Mexican drug cartels, or at least that's what I vaguely know about that story.
Well, so Fast and the Furious is really just a sting operation where the government sucked. I mean, it's not a particularly charitable view of it, but it's slightly better than what you get most of the time, right? They sold guns to Mexican drug cartels under the pretense that they would be able to track the guns so they could find the center of the Mexican drug cartels and then take them down, and then they never did that. So the end result is they just sold a bunch of guns to Mexican drug cartels.
So they never followed up with their original plan, basically.
So supposedly they were gonna one day, right? I mean, prior to that ICE agent getting killed with one of the guns. Nobody knew about it, and so it was taking its time, and they were working through the investigation. And don't worry, next year we'll figure it out. But then it became a big scandal, except that Obama didn't have scandals, so something. And then the whole operation went away, which forced the outcome that all we ever did was sell guns to Mexican drug cartels.
It almost sounds kind of in somewhat a contrast of like a Reagan with Iran-Contra or something like that. Like the original intent was something a little bit more virtuous, but the end result was something more was an immoral scandal that happened on each president's appropriate part.
Well, here's the difference, right? So Reagan didn't really give a damn. Like he had no compunctions about going to the Iranians and being like, well, we're going to actually do this, right? And Obama, on the other hand, went to every country on the planet and said, America's terrible, and we understand why you hate us, and these sorts of things, and wouldn't push any of this. So as ambitious as it sounds to sell guns to Mexican drug cartels so you can find the Mexican drug cartels and destroy them, the simple fact is he was never going to permit that. So it was doomed from the start.
You know what? I completely forgotten something to show this on my Discord on my Discord server.
Oops.
Which I don't know if you really care, but I'll get you like an invite to my Discord server after this.
Cool.
All right. And by the way, don't worry, Chatsburg is not there. he left after that rage quit.
Shocking. Of all the things I worry about in this world, Chatsburg is not even on my radar.
Yeah.
So, I mean, okay. But there's a relevant question in chat. Why does Obama hate America? So, in true Don the Pleb style, go forth and read A Conflict of Visions. Soul lays it out, right? It's this idea that there are leaders, the Chairman Mao, I guess, right? And they know how best to run everyone's lives, and if only we had found the right people, and on and on and on. And if that's what you think, then the idea of being free, the idea of people being able to live their own lives because they know better is anathema to you. And that's the whole premise of the country, right? And so he must hate America because it is everything that is terrible.
Right. And this is kind of something that I wanted to like get on with you as well. Like putting Reagan and Obama in the specific by name presidents that I am mentioning and wanted to mention. Who would you think, in your opinion, is the worst president?
Wilson.
Wilson? He was the one that created the Federal Reserve, wasn't he?
Yeah, basically. I mean, among many other ridiculous travesties. But Wilson was the worst president for a different reason, right? Though creating the Federal Reserve is an output of that. Wilson is the very first time in American history where you get the idea that presidents should follow the experts because the experts know best, right? He was the very first president to gather them all up so we could tell everybody how to live their lives, right? Woodrow Wilson was the worst. He got us into World War I and ended American isolationism. Yeah, that too. I mean, but simply fact of the matter is he is the genesis of basically all of our problems, right? So Obama couldn't have existed without Wilson. FDR couldn't have existed without Wilson. Everything that you bitch about, if you are even vaguely libertarian, could not have happened without Wilson. And so in this, I mean, look, could he have precisely predicted that Obama would happen? No. I mean, seriously, the idea in 1901 or whenever the fuck he was president, that first of all, there was going to be a black president. That was
1901 was Theodore Roosevelt.
Whenever the hell it was, Wilson was president. I don't remember off the top of my head. But regardless, when he was president, this is when we started all of this, right? And he hated black people, so no. Yes. By the way, he is also the guy that, the Americans, the American president showed Birth of a Nation in the White House. Yeah, that was Wilson. 12 to 20, I thought. You're probably correct, right? Because that surrounds the time when he did things. But this is, he was the first progressive president, period. Whoever the hell was president in 1890 probably gets a little bit of credit for this simply because of the Sherman Antitrust Act. But Wilson did the majority of setup for nearly all of the problems we have now. And if not for that, go ahead.
What exactly is it that he done regarding segregation and whatnot that makes him so racist?
He was the first president to have the federal government enforce segregation laws, right? And state segregation laws. So that's why everybody gives him a hard time for being racist. Truth be told, of all the things in the world that he did, I care about his goddamn racism the least, right? He was a Democrat. Yes, he was a Democrat. Of course he was a Democrat, right? But he was, he's part of how we ended up with the fucking Nazis, because all of that eugenics shit that they were going along with there, Wilson was a fan, right? And it's where we get these ideas about
Margaret Sanger.
Right? But he's where we get these ideas in a national conversation that eugenics, well, maybe it's not that bad of a thing, right? And that, you can have any of this be a thing. And I know somebody's going to say, well, Don, but there were racist presidents before that probably would have supported eugenics because the blacks are evil. Okay, good for them, right? Again, he pushed all of these things in a way that the federal government hadn't done before. Even during the height of slavery, the feds weren't enforcing slavery laws. Seriously.
The feds were not enforcing slavery laws?
No, it was done almost exclusively locally. And so, to the point where you can go back and read about interstate complaints, because if you crossed a state line, often other states just didn't care, right? Like, oh, but that's an escaped slave. Yeah, I don't give a shit. Whatever. Who cares? That's a you problem, right? And if the feds were enforcing slavery laws, that wouldn't have happened.
Right. That puts a little bit extra nuance regarding the Civil War. Which, that's one thing that is particularly that I find particularly disapproving of Abe Lincoln. Not necessarily the Civil War itself, but him arresting reporters that would dare criticize the Civil War.
Well,
pretty anti-free speech.
Yeah. Lincoln is not as great of a guy as third grade history told you.
Right.
What else can I say? He is the genesis of quite a few other problems. We bitch today about executive orders, right? And that's what the Emancipation Proclamation was. Who screwed up America?
Nine presidents who screwed up America. And as you can see, goes Jackson, Lincoln, Roosevelt, Wilson, Roosevelt, Truman, Johnson, Nixon, Obama.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there you go. I'm still in the middle of reading that book. Like, see where the bookmark is at. That's how far I'm into it. If only I would read more often. But anyway, so go on.
Anyway, I don't know. I don't think Lincoln is as bad as some variety of the world would tell you, but certainly the specifically court fallout, I guess, from the Civil War was pretty fucking bad, right? The things that happened in the Supreme Court post the Civil War ended state sovereignty of any variety, right? So that's bad. And then it's sort of how we get to like the federal gas tax and federal road money came out of that. But again, all of that, right? You couldn't have had that if Wilson hadn't just have done whatever the hell he wanted about 70 years before. And presidents built on what he did. And so he's probably not the genesis. He's just my favorite person to hate on for being a pile of crap.
Yeah, I mean, it's really FDR that the left, modern day left, seems to look up more to more often, like Tom Hartman, for example.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, FDR got a lot of headline victories, right? And Wilson should be their unsung hero, right? Because without Wilson, everything FDR does fails. Everything.
You know, speaking of unsung heroes, I guess I'll also ask of who is like your top favorite president. Would it be Coolidge by chance, or who?
I don't know. The problem is that every time I've answered this in the past, I start reading more about that person, then I find out I don't like him very much. So
you find out that there's a lot of things to be very disapproving. Like, I take it there was one time of where that you were like more approving of Reagan, but then you read about the Hughes Amendment and his influence on that and whatnot.
Yeah, actually, I didn't read about it. I was just sitting there. I think it happened in the middle of a stream. Actually, I was talking to people about guns, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. Wait a minute, the Hughes Amendment passed in '87. Who was president then? Reagan. What the hell?
Son of a bitch.
Yeah. So, Ron Paul should have won 2012. Yeah, that was never going to happen. Sorry, guys.
And sorry, Pumpkin Row, you started streaming while I was donating plasma, and I completely forgot of what you had requested me on DMs, where you wanted me to inform you more often of when I'm streaming, Row. So my bad about that.
Discord at everyone. I'm telling you, it is the single best thing for notifications for streams that I have found, because you sure as hell cannot expect YouTube to make it happen.
You know, that basically that explains as why that you like provide the Discord, the link to your Discord server in like every single stream that you do, so that any newcomers to the channel, they want to like be more consistently informed on when you are streaming or uploading shit, that they can join your server, and through that server you notify them. Yeah. Hey, I got this new upload. Hey, I got this new stream coming up here in a bit.
Yep. It is substantially better than any other notification system that I know. And I know it's become cool to like get on my mailing list, but seriously, if you want more email, then you let me know.
You know, no, actually, that's something that I really ought to consider, actually, providing a link to my Discord server down in the description box of my videos. Oh, excuse me.
No, I mean, it's all about what you want to use your Discord server for, right? And if it does, I don't know, 3 things maybe for me. 1, I do actually talk to people in there. 2, there's the ridiculous memery that is the internet. And 3, and by far most importantly, it's the only notification system on the internet that actually works. So,
you know, we talked about all these presidents. I guess we'll kind of segue towards present day.
Yeah.
Segue towards present day, talking about Trump and what you would say that you disapprove of regarding him. I mean, obviously, guns is like a big one of them, because I and S-Man had that big argument with that retard on Twitter. And I said retard, so flag my YouTube channel now. Oh my gosh. We had that argument with him. What?
That's it. You're screwed. You said the R word. R word.
The forbidden R word.
Exactly. I forget what that argument was about. I gotta be honest, I don't care about Twitter that much.
Yeah, and honestly, I'd probably get rid of my Twitter, probably, or I would at least put it into consideration. If not, there was like one particular associate of mine who does not have Discord, unfortunately. So I keep contact. What?
That's the way, right? I mean, all of us end up there for some niche use that is definitely not what Twitter intended. And other than that, talk a lot of shit.
Wait a minute. Twitter did not intend it, or Discord did not intend?
Twitter didn't intend, right? So, I mean, like, if you're there just to have DMs to send one person, right? That's not what Twitter thinks Twitter is for.
Pumpkin Row is calling us homosexuals, apparently, because he says Twitter's for homosexuals.
I mean, you're not wrong. Well, welcome to having a YouTube channel. You end up doing a lot of gay things.
Oh my gosh, Don, your beard is so sexy.
That's pretty gay.
Oh shit. Okay, yeah. The way that you said that's pretty gay, you kind of reminded me of one of my uncles right there for a second. Oh yeah. Anyway, we were having that argument with that guy, and the argument was basically just about Donald Trump's gun position and how he's like kind of anti-gun, overall anti-gun, with the way that he's approaching guns, speaking on guns, and so far as legislated on guns.
Look, in the world of output, the only thing that has actually happened is the bump stock ban. That's it. It's the only thing he's actually done. Everything else is just things that Trump says, right? And I mean, look, if you want to go off of things that Trump says to determine what his stance on a thing is, you're going to have a little bit of a problem, because he says everything. And I mean, like, literally everything, right?
Flip, flop, and flips again.
What we should do is we should take the guns, then have the due process. Oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to protect the Second Amendment rights. I don't want anybody taking your guns.
In the span of like 36 hours.
Twitter's faggotry. Okay, sorry. I actually remember one meme that one of your followers shared on Discord. It was a meme of a Donald Trump supporter wearing the MAGA hat and all, and he was turning in his AR-15 to Donald Trump, and it was like, 40 chests, right? And Trump was all like, yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Hey,
That even pissed off Steven Crowder, of all people, that people were like claiming 40 chests regarding Trump and his gun control rhetoric.
Yeah. And look, I think the answer here is that he kind of doesn't care, because he's a 90s Democrat, right? He kind of is, right? If you go back and you look at what he's doing, he's basically a slightly more, and compare him to another president, as it were, he's a slightly more business-friendly Clinton. That's it. And he seems to understand economics at all, which is helpful. So,
yeah, if they don't understand economics, will they get active in economics? And if they're not active in economics, well, then more power towards libertarians and other people that would like the government to have more of a hands-off approach when it comes to the economy, you know?
Well, I mean, that'd be nice, but
unfortunately,
that's not how it goes, right? It's a pretty hard sell, or at least I have found it to be, to say, well, look, you can take care of your own problems and you don't need the government, because there's no gives in that, right? And so, when you say, I'm going to give you something for free, people like that. And
oh yeah, and they don't even think about the costs and whatnot. That's why Bernie Sanders sells so good.
Right. I mean, look, most of the time I find people opposed to Bernie, it's on some sort of non-economic ideological level, like socialism is bad, and we know that, and he's a socialist. Nobody has any idea what the fuck that means, but, I mean, I guess whatever keeps him out of office.
Yeah.
Anyway, as far as Trump goes and other things that I dislike, I don't think he's as bad as everyone in the world would try and make him out to be, right? What the hell was the Restorative Justice Act, or whatever the fuck that thing was? We're just going to let people out of jail.
I did not hear about that one.
God, I forget what it was called, but his softer, gentler justice fucking crap, that he just runs around, pardons people if someone gets an audience with him. Like, this is not a good thing, right? And look, if you want to change the law, if you think the drug war is terrible, and I'm not even arguing that it's not, I don't care what your opinion on it is, but if you think it's terrible, The Kim Kardashian bill, yes. But if you think it's terrible, then the answer is not, well, okay, we'll just let people out of jail, right? It changed the law. It's like what the government's there for, right?
Margaret wanted it. Margaret Sanger is the one who really pushed Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she's basically the genesis of Planned Parenthood.
Pretty much the godmother of abortion, the abortion movement. One could say.
Kinda. I mean,
aside from her, is there really any big figurehead that really shoehorned abortion kind of in the same way that Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell shoehorned and, libertarianism, or even Ayn Rand for that matter?
not really. I mean, the Supreme Court.
Oh, which judge? No. Godmother of abortion. That's a funny phrase. Yeah, it is kind of ironic because if you're just aborting your own kids constantly, then that makes you not a mother, ultimately. What was I going to mention? Damn it. Oh, yeah. You say you made the comparison earlier saying that Donald Trump is just a more business-friendly version of Clinton. That's another thing when it comes to like Bill Clinton. He wasn't exactly the most pro open borders president like back when he was president anyways. Well, or at least I generally hear regarding his speeches anyways.
So here's the shtick. In the 90s, it was not politically popular to be open borders, so the Clintons were not open borders.
Yeah, there is that to consider too. The Clintons are flip-floppers, but then again, so is Trump.
Yeah, well, I mean, most politicians are, right? So if you're going to complain about that, then there is no winning here, right? Well, I'm here to represent the people, and so I'm suggesting that we should do X, and then the people say they don't want it. So I say, never mind, we shouldn't do X. Oh, you're a flip-flopper. Or are you representing the populace that you were elected to represent? I don't know. But someone will hate you for it, regardless.
Sorry, I'm getting distracted by chat. Trying to narrow abortion down to one person is a bit silly since the government is what's subsidizing Planned Parenthood and makes most of their money from it. And Pumpkin Roll also says they also benefit because it reduces the cost of social programs while also increasing dependence on the government.
Okay. Well, so you're comparing a modern day situation to a genesis, right? So it had to start somewhere, right? And wherever it started, right, as a political movement would be where you narrow it down to one person or a group or whatever. That it has worked into this giant bureaucratic nightmare that it is doesn't change where it started, right?
I guess that's one thing that kind of doesn't impress me that much with Trump. Like, supposedly he has been like pro-choice for most of his career of speaking out on politics, just and most of his life in general. And then all of a sudden he takes this radical stance of wanting to punish women who like get abortions, like during the campaign at least. And now during his time as president, like what has he done regarding abortion so far? I don't see him like shoehorning in like defunding Planned Parenthood in the same way that Rand Paul did.
Well,
are we breaking up? Did you hear me right there?
No, I heard you.
Okay, that was weird. My camera kind of spazzed out there, and so did yours.
Yeah, well, that happens. So I guess the big question there is, do you believe Trump's story, right? Because look, at this point, I think it's fair to say the right wing wouldn't exist except for lefties jumping off the leftism train, because that's how the right gets people, right? Nobody at 5 years old is going, what we should do is we should cancel the welfare state. If you're 5 and you know anything about welfare, it's that it put food on your table, right? Or that your parents bitch about it, right? That's not really a political stance. And so, look, generally what happens as you go through school is they feed you all this leftist crap, and so you're kind of a leftist at the end of high school, right? And then if you go to college, they feed you more leftist crap, and you're more of a leftist. And then you get a paycheck and you go, Jesus Christ, taxes suck.
I don't recall having that much of a position on welfare when I was like a kid, but I do at least remember that keeping taxes low sounds like a good idea to me.
Yeah. And look, that's as good as you get. I mean, what are we expecting out of 12-year-olds here? 15-year-olds like that. And this is another thing with the but 16-year-olds should be able to vote on what?
But of course, the timeline that I was referencing to was also the time that I was listening to nothing but Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity whenever my dad had those programs on, which they don't have that much of a intellectual. They don't have that much intellect when it comes to politics. They're just rather black and white, and don't really go in depth in analyzing politics. Like I've never looked at politics from a constitutional standpoint, or at least American politics, anyways, from a constitutional standpoint until I started actually listening to Mark Levin, for example, and how much like the right, well, not the right necessarily, but the Republican establishment kind of betrays its own base until listening to Mark Levin. As far as I know, Hannity and Limbaugh, they don't talk as much against the Republican establishment as Levin does.
Well, I guess the question there is, are they betraying their base, right? Look, it's easy to say that they are, right? Republicans want X, Y, and Z, but they keep electing people who don't do that. Well, do they want X, Y, and Z, or do they want whatever they're getting out of these politicians? So, and I know this suggests that there can be more priorities than just whatever it is that Republicans, when asked, say they want. And yet, again, revealed preferences say, if you elect the same guy 37 times, well, then you wanted to elect that guy 37 times, or at least the majority did. Sorry.
Unfortunately. Which that is kind of another thing that was brought up on Twitter. Like an associate of mine, he did like a Twitter poll talking about it, since that both parties seem to be kind of anti-gun, at least this go around when it comes to presidential elections, should that topic just be kept completely off the table and we just talk about other issues? Yes, no, not sure. And I said, no, gun rights should still be on the table. It's just that Trump should like completely get his act together when it comes to guns, or if he's not going to get his act together on guns should still be an issue regarding this presidential election. And if you're going to have like both the mainstream parties be fairly against guns, and that's going to like leave a bit of an opening for like the rise of the Libertarian Party, possibly, because the Republican politicians, they might be, or particularly Trump more specifically, might be becoming more apathetic when it comes to guns. But as far as the populace goes, yeah, I don't see like this huge influx of just, Republican voters saying, yeah, I hate my guns. They're just being rather ignorant when it comes to Trump's stance on guns, at least.
Well, so the thing that is going to keep Trump pro-gun is that, it's social media, right? And that's it. Trump isn't going to back any anti-gun stuff because Trump reads Twitter, right? And so when Trump goes out, we're going to have the best red flag laws. It's going to make sure the crazy people don't get guns. And then, like the 6 people that he cares about what they say are all like, give me tanks, damn it. Then his answer is like, oh, the fan base doesn't like anti-gun stuff, so never mind. I guess to be fair, he is reactive to the people who elected him. And in that, those people are not anti-gun. So good, I guess.
I just remembered something. Proud Yank was mentioning welfare, and that kind of made me indirectly go thinking about labor force participation. You mentioned something about regarding current economic growth under Trump, like how the unemployment rate has been pretty low, but at the same time, the labor force participation rate hasn't risen much during Trump's tenure. Like it's been lower ever since the middle of Obama's tenure. The participation rate in the labor force that rose during Reagan's time, it was pretty steady throughout the Clintons, and at least the early Bush years. Then it kind of dropped definitely during Obama's time. Like that's my problem with the whole mentioning of unemployment rate just by itself. That doesn't mention of who overall is working.
Okay, so there's a lot here, and it's very nerdy. So get your glasses, get your spreadsheets. All right.
I got my glasses, both pairs on right now.
Exactly. Push them up a little bit, right? Anyway, so the labor force participation rate isn't going to change anytime soon. The American labor force is, if I recall correctly, 160 million people. There are roughly 40 million people who receive Social Security in some form or another that they use as a primary or only source of income. That means that roughly 25% of the labor force is never going to work again, right? They aren't. They're retired. And yet they are counted in a labor force participation rate. Equally speaking, when you add in how many people are in college, which are usually not working either in this world that we live in now, because when you go to college, it should be about the experience. And you should drink on Fridays with your boys, right? So whatever the fuck we do in this goddamn country anymore. When you add that in, you end up with something like 30 to 33, depending on the year. And by the way, as we subsidize college, the number of people in college not working goes up, right? So those amount of people are also never going to be in the workforce because, yes, okay, I get it. The individual person will leave college and presumably become part of the workforce. However, at the same time, someone new will replace them. Right. And as the country grows, more people will fall into that category, but the workforce will grow. So what we end up with is roughly 35% of the population who in any given year, at any statistical moment, will not be part of the workforce no matter what. The labor force participation rate in this country is something like 65%. I mean, there's no way around it. And we can cancel Social Security. You'll see more people working. We can stop subsidizing college. You'll see more people working. Those are horrendously unpopular things.
Can put the work mandate back into applying for food stamps, or even better yet, get rid of food stamps altogether.
You could. And you're going to get some labor force participation rate. I mean, when Clinton did it, labor force participation rate went up something like 4 or 5%. So, I mean,
Wait, what did he do about food stamps?
Clinton pushed the administration in its entirety and the financial burden back down to the states. It's probably one of the best things Clinton did while he was president. It was his big welfare reform package. And because of that, the states were suddenly financially liable for the people who were on welfare. And yes, they did get a stipend from the feds, but it didn't actually cover it. And then it turned out the states didn't have unlimited money or the availability to print unlimited money. And so they went, oh, Jesus Christ, we actually have to pay for this? And then people got off welfare. All of that was undone between Bush and Obama, though. So, hooray.
What was I? Oh, yeah, that's another thing when it comes to labor force participation is that when people, people on the left, or Obama's defenders at least, will be saying unemployment is great. It's at its lowest point, like during the administration at least. And then people on the right will say, but labor force participation is getting lower and lower. And the left will say, oh, that's just old people retiring. But then you go look at the numbers by age. They weren't retiring en masse during Obama's time. It remained fairly steady.
So,
old people,
what you're talking
anyways.
about there,
it was middle-aged and young people that were decreasing, especially young people. Sorry?
So what you're talking about isn't labor force participation rate. And back to, get your nerdy glasses on, right? So the U6 unemployment statistic is what you're talking about, which is those who are within a pre-retired age range or over 18 and could in some fashion work. And Obama's U3 statistic, which is what we talk about when we talk unemployment most of the time, was not that bad. But his U6 statistic exploded, which is the number of people who otherwise could be working but aren't and are not even looking for a job, right? So relevantly speaking, that number has come down over Trump. You can go get it from the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
So the reason why I say labor force participation rate specifically is because there's this one website called St. Louis Fed, or Fred as it's nicknamed. And here, if I can screen share this, one moment, screen two, allow, and yeah, that's where I'd be looking at it more precisely. Now, of course, this website also has other sheets that go breaking it down by age, but
Yeah.
this is not looking at it by age. It's just the overall labor force participation rate. As you
Yes.
see, throughout the 80s, it risen, 90s, and early 2000s is fairly steady. Then it kind of dropped off right there in the late 2000s.
Right. What I'm telling you is you're pulling the wrong stat. Right. I mean, that looks terrible, and it is. It's not good, right? On the other hand, lots of things happened during that time. One, we increased the availability of Social Security disability. That started a little bit under Clinton, but the real big line for it was under Obama, right? When he went around and said that, like, basically anything qualifies you for Social Security disability. And so, shock of shocks, people took money for not having to do anything. Who knew? But that removes them from labor force participation, right? What you're looking for is, if you go to bls.gov or just Google bls.gov U6 unemployment, and you'll find it. And
What's the name of the website?
BL Bravo Lima Sierra BLS.
Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Yes, sir.
They have like their own graphs, kind of like how Fred does.
Yeah. Actually, Fred looks like it's pulling from BLS. So
yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what I was about to mention, was that they pull from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Yeah,
right.
It's down there at the bottom, right beneath the graph. Source: U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Right. But it doesn't change whether or not you're looking at the right stat, right? And labor force participation, as much as it sounds a lot like U6, is not U6, right? Which is why they don't match up.
How does, I'm sorry, perhaps I missed this and wasn't paying attention, but how does U6 reflect how many people are actually working within the country again?
In the inverse, right? So the U6 is the number of people who are in a workforce participation availability of some fashion that are not employed and not looking for a job, right?
So basically the non-participation rate?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I gotcha. Well, I guess that's kind of what I look at with the labor force participation rate. That if the amount of people participating, whatever percentage that would be, the rest of the 100% would be the people not participating. But there's only two possibilities that a person could be in those categories.
So in the world of U6, yeah. So what U3 is, which is, again, when we talk unemployment rates in the U.S., we talk the U3 statistic. That is people who are unemployed and looking for a job. U6 is unemployed and includes unemployed who are not looking for a job. If I remember correctly, workforce participation rate is related to U2, yeah. So the difference here between workforce participation and the U6 stat is that the U6 stat ignores people who are retired, right? Because they are not a part of the group of people who ever are going to be looking for a job, right? Regardless, it removes that which is no longer worth talking about. Labor force participation rate does not. So look, if you want to go after the labor force participation rate stuff, then what you're saying is get rid of Social Security. And I'm sold. Get rid of Social Security. However, if what you want to talk about is the group of people who could have a job and don't, and are or are not looking, then what you want is U3 and U6, not labor force participation.
U3 and U6 being labor force non-participation, right?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. Unfortunately, though, I searched up labor force non-participation, and Fred doesn't have that. Maybe I'll have to actually look into the BLS website and see if they have specifically non-participation.
Give me just a second.
BLS.gov. My sister's cat is scratching outside my door.
So in the StreamYard side chat is all of the U numbers, as it were. Unemployed 15 weeks or longer as a percentage of the labor force, U1, right? And it goes back to 97, right?
All right, let me save this link here.
And if you click the little chart data thing, it'll give you by month stats, right? So, I mean,
U3 unemployment rate was 4.1% in December 2017. U6 was 8.1%. Okay. TED, the Economics Daily of Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay. These are like relatively low percentages right here that I'm seeing on this graph down below. They're like none of them reach over 20%, although I guess it's because they're breaking them down by age or something.
No. So we don't have a 20% unemployment rate. So
never mind. It's not breaking them down by age. It's breaking them down by personal work status. It looks like.
Yeah. Well, basically,
or lack of work.
So let's see. The one that you want, the line that we're talking about, is the one on the very top.
All right. So I'm gonna. Okay. Kundra Thunt says, "Link us, Don." I've just sent the link in the chat right now. Kundra Thunt, if you wanted to see that.
Isn't unemployment down because most people have 2 jobs?
So wait, they'd be double counting. They'd be double counting people to. They'd be double counting people to inflate or artificially deflate the unemployment number.
Well, so that's it. It's something that AOC said. It has nothing to do with statistics, and it's
Well, AOC, let us apply the same logic to Obama then.
Right. Apparently, everyone had 71 jobs. That's why unemployment was going down.
I see. I think that we're pretty much done here in regards to talking about U.S. presidents. I mean, it was a nice in-depth conversation. I'm sure that we'll talk about U.S. presidents a whole lot more in further because, the game of politics, it's never ending.
Yeah, well, that's a fact. I feel like I let Trump off light here.
Some further insults you want to talk about the guy?
Well, I mean, look, his economic policy is good. His foreign policy is not too bad. I mean, I know everybody fucking hates his foreign policy, but look, he gets what he wants, right? The question then becomes, is what he wants a good thing? And that's not always sure.
At least he did not take John Bolton's advice and invade North Korea.
See, chat is exactly why I brought up his economic policy. His economic policy is not good. He passed tariffs. Okay.
Right.
Now, what does that mean? Is this mercantilism? Because if it's mercantilism, then his economic policy is crap unto itself, except that it's not mercantilism. What Trump is doing with tariffs, whether anybody likes it or not, is he's tariffing other countries that are tariffing us in an attempt to open up markets to the United States that are not currently open because we are tariffed in other countries. Now, presumably, that's in promotion of free trade. Now, I know, you're going to have to read beyond a New York Times headline here, and I know I'm asking a lot. However, what Trump did is specifically with China, is put a bunch of tariffs on them because they were tariffing every American good. And then when they raised their tariffs, he filed a grievance with the International Trade Organization so that China had to lower their tariffs back to where they were legally limited to hold them. And then he raised tariffs again, saying, look, I'm legally permitted to raise mine because I had mine down at 0 and you're not. So neener, I'm the only one who can apply economic pressure. Get rid of your tariffs and then I'll get rid of mine. Now, whether or not you think that's a winning strategy is entirely up to you. However, it did factually work with Mexico. So, and provably already happened.
All right.
You support tariffs, therefore you do not support free trade. Like I said, you're going to have to actually pay attention to the words that came out of my mouth because This right here is the I have absolutely no sense of a plan that goes beyond the next 5 minutes. Now, look, your time preference is entirely up to you. I'm not going to tell you that you have to look at some long-term goal and decide whether or not the long-term goal is good. If you just want to scream tariffs are always bad, then go right ahead. And if tariffs were some permanent solution, then you would be correct. Being as they are a method of leverage being applied to accomplish a longer-term goal, it seems worthwhile to look at the longer-term goal.
Yeah, I don't think that anyone is saying that tariffs are good in of itself, Pumpkin Roll. I think it's because I think the rhetoric here is because tariffs are bad, why we want to, why we want to put counter tariffs, or at least that seems to be the position that Don, I don't know, is more or less defending. I don't know if you're like in full support of that.
I don't care what your point of view on this being a good or bad thing is, but at least if you're going to criticize him for having tariffs, criticize what he's doing. Not just, oh, tariffs exist, therefore they're bad. Yes, I get it. As an economic policy, tariffs are terrible. The Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was probably one of the worst things that ever happened in American fucking history, because that was the premise that we could perpetually live off tariffs, which, again, love him or loathe him, that is not Trump's premise. Otherwise, we would have tariffs on Mexico right now that we don't have. As soon as they bowed to his will, he pulled the tariffs. Pretty clearly, he thinks they're an economic club to hit people with to get what you want. And, by the way, he's getting his way. So...
Well, I don't know about China necessarily, because wasn't there something about China like playing the rare earths card, quote unquote? Yeah. Like, basically, they were going to restrict whatever rare earths is dealt to the U.S.
Well, so, yes. Man, I got to stop arguing with chat. Look, I've explained this to you. You don't have to like it. Again, it is the reality of the situation. I don't care if you think it's good, bad, or otherwise. I'm telling you, screaming tariffs is bad is not an accurate assessment of the situation. No, tariffs are not good. They are bad economic policy in some sort of perpetual way. If you think that the country should enforce its economic interests, and again, I'm not so sure that's a good idea either, anywhere else, then by all means, assess that question accordingly. Now, once again, we started this earlier, right? Is the question then becomes, is what he wants any good, right? And by all means, address that question. I don't mind. Say, no, China should be able to have 25% tariffs on American goods and we shouldn't care. And that's fine. I mean, look, it's an economically sound enough argument, right? And cool. It's what we've been doing for 50 years under the pretense that if we lower tariffs, everybody else will. Now,
I think trade with foreign nations would become less of an issue. The whole tariff war with China would become much less of an issue if we just opened up our own market a little bit more, like whatever rare earths, minerals, mineral deposits we have, open them up for the market just so that we don't have to be so reliant on China and they cannot play the rare earths card, as it is called.
Well, so we would...
Fill the minimum wage would be another thing. Go on.
That would be great. I'm totally sold. That is 100% the correct answer in my opinion. I just don't think it's going to happen. So, again, I'm not saying that Trump is correct for what he's doing. If somehow or another at the end of this there are no tariffs with China and they're not going to be for, I don't know, 100 years, then all right, it worked out. But yes, getting rid of regulation, getting rid of things like minimum wage, getting rid of the EPA would do orders of magnitude more for us. And he is doing some things on that front. They're just not very well publicized. And when they are, they're publicized negatively.
I don't know if rare earth deposits in the U.S., says Kunderthund. All right, well, maybe I'm ignorant on that fact of how much rare earths or whatever that we have here in the U.S., but I was just saying, like, in general. So, like, if we have any, then they ought to be, like, opened up to the market rather than us focusing on attacking China via trade war.
Well, and look, it's not totally unreasonable. Almost all of the rare earth metals in the U.S. are in Southern California, and California, as a state, said, we're not letting you mine them.
This kind of brings up the subject of splitting off California into 6 different states. that was a thing. Like, I think it was during the beginning of Obama's second term or something like that. And if that were to be the case, maybe you could have like South California be a little bit more lenient on their economic policy and not be so much controlled by the coastal cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles and whatnot.
Well, all of the plans to break up California, I mean, at best, we get 2 states that are more economically friendly than California is right now, and we get 2 states that are going to be just as bad. And the state of Jefferson guys who have been trying to turn Northern California into its own state since like 1970, they're not getting anywhere either. But even if they did, again, we end up with 2 states. One of them is ridiculously overtly blue, and one of them is like kind of red.
Maybe a bit of a swing state or something.
Might be, actually. Depends exactly on where they drew the line. But look, I will say that some of the most conservative people I've ever met in my life live in the hills of California, which nobody ever wants to hear. Like, no, San Francisco, they poop on the street. Yeah, that's also like 500 miles from the hills of California. So, I mean, nothing changes at 500 miles.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm going to wrap this up here pretty soon. It was a good conversation. We talked about the good things regarding presidents, like when it comes to deficit decreases under Obama, or taxes under Reagan, or gun rights, or rather lack of, under Reagan. Those are some of the big things, and many other things. So I would suggest to everybody that is in the chat and is coming kind of late, Pumpkin Row, for example, that you rewatch the entire stream. It was quite an interesting conversation here with Don. And so what do you have to say in closing, Don?
It was good times. Chat brings up an interesting point. There's no good thing from any president. Are you high? Well, I mean, look, there have been good things, right? But you have to not be an absolutist anarchist. And sorry, I'm not. That said, thanks for having me, man. It's been a while since I've gone and been on anybody else's channel for any reason. It's nice when it's not someone that it's just a constant fucking argument with.
Yeah, I mean, you and I align pretty well when it comes to the political issues, so it's kind of easy enough. And if we were to get Reckless Trucker on this conversation, you of course know who Reckless Trucker is. It would be an absolute circle jerk between the 3 of us.
I know who he is. I don't think we've ever spoken. And it is, I think 3 or 4 times we were going to set up us talking at some point, but it has just never worked out. So if you happen to see this, Reckless Trucker, by all means, I don't know, jump on the channel, hit the Discord or something. We'll figure something out.
All right. So without further ado, everybody, thanks for joining along and giving us a passionate discussion with your chat comments and so forth. And as always, see y'all later. Have a good evening. God bless and good night. And broadcast.